In the sweltering summer of 1800, the Hawthorne tobacco plantation sprawled across the rolling hills of eastern Virginia, like a green kingdom built on suffering. The great house stood white and proud on a rise overlooking the fields, its columns gleaming in the sun, while down below, rows of dark figures bent and rose in endless rhythm under the watchful eye of the overseer. Elias Hawthorne, master of it all, was a man of 55, whose face had hardened into permanent lines of authority. His wife had died a decade earlier, leaving him with one child, a son named Theodore, whom Elias both loved and despised in equal measure. Theodore, or Theo as the household called him, was 22 years old and had grown soft from a life of ease. He was heavy around the middle, his cheeks flushed from too much port and too little exertion. His days were spent lounging on the wide veranda, fanning himself lazily while he watched the field hands toil. He took particular delight in mocking them from afar, calling out slurred insults when the liquor was in him, or tossing half-eaten fruit into the dust so they might scramble for it like dogs. The enslaved people endured it in silence, their eyes fixed on the earth, knowing that any response would bring the whip. Elias watched his son with growing fury. The plantation was his life's work, built from nothing through ruthless calculation and unyielding will. He had bought and sold human beings without a flicker of remorse, believing that order demanded it, that civilization itself rested on the strong commanding the weak. Yet here was his only heir, a weakling who gambled away money in Richmond taverns and showed no interest in the ledgers or the fields. Elias feared that when he was gone, everything he had built would crumble under Theo's idle hands. The breaking point came on a humid evening in July. Theo had returned from a 3-day jaunt to town with empty pockets and a hangover that made him surly. He had lost heavily at cards to a group of young planters, and desperate to cover his debts, had quietly taken a purse of gold from his father's strongbox. Elias discovered the theft the next morning when he went to pay the overseer. The amount was not trivial. It would have bought 2 prime field hands at auction. Elias summoned Theo to the study, a room lined with leather-bound books he never read and maps of the estate. Theo slouched in, still reeking of stale wine, expecting a lecture. Instead, Elias's voice was ice. "You have stolen from me," he said. "From the plantation. From the legacy I have bled for." Theo tried to laugh it off. "It was only a loan, father." "I'll pay it back when—" "There will be no more loans," Elias cut in. "No more allowances. No more fine clothes or horses or tavern nights. You will learn what this place truly costs." Theo's smirk faded. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elias said, rising to his full height, "that you will work in the fields. Like the lazy, thieving creature you have become." Theo stared, waiting for the jest. When none came, panic flickered in his eyes. "You cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious." Elias's voice carried to the hallway, where house servants pretended not to listen. "You will wear their clothes, eat their rations, rise when they rise and sleep when they sleep, for 1 full year. And if you run, I will have you hunted down and brought back in chains." The punishment was carried out the very next dawn. Elias ordered Theo stripped of his linen shirt and breeches in front of the assembled workers. Coarse Osnaburg trousers and a shirt were thrown at his feet. Theo protested, begged, even wept, but Elias stood unmoved. When Theo refused to dress himself, 2 house servants were ordered to do it for him, roughly, while the field hands watched in silence. Then Elias turned to the overseer, Mr. Grayson, a thin man with a perpetual squint and a whip always at his belt. "Assign him to the lower field crew. No special treatment. If he shirks, treat him as you would any other." Grayson nodded, though his eyes betrayed unease. Punishing the master's son was uncharted territory. The crew was led by Josiah, an enslaved man of 38 who had been born on the plantation and knew every inch of its soil. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his skin darkened by decades under the sun, his face calm in a way that unsettled white men. They could never tell what he was thinking. The workers respected him because he never raised his voice unnecessarily, never wasted motion, and shared what little he had. When Grayson pointed to Theo and said, "This one's with you now," Josiah only inclined his head. The first day was agony for Theo. The sun rose fierce and early, and the crew was in the fields by 5. Theo stumbled behind, already sweating through the rough fabric. Josiah handed him a hoe without a word. Theo swung it clumsily, missing the weeds entirely and nearly striking his own foot. The other workers moved in steady unison, their hoes biting clean into the earth. Theo lasted less than an hour before he dropped the tool and collapsed in the shade of a tobacco plant, gasping that he would die. Josiah paused, looked down at him, and said quietly, "The sun don't care who your daddy is, young master. It burns the same." Theo glared up at him. "You will address me properly, boy." Josiah's expression did not change. He simply turned back to his row. The others followed suit. No one came to help Theo. When Grayson rode by on his horse an hour later and saw Theo sitting, he cracked the whip in the air near the boy's head. "Up," he snarled, "or the next one tastes your back." Theo rose, trembling with rage and fear, and took up the hoe again. By noon, his hands were blistered and bleeding. At the midday break, the workers sat in the scant shade with their corn pone and water. Theo expected someone to bring him food from the big house. Nothing came. When he demanded a share of the workers' rations, they looked away. Josiah finally broke off a piece of his own pone and handed it over without comment. Theo snatched it and ate greedily, hating the man for the gesture. That night Theo was not allowed back in the great house. He was given a pallet in the corner of a storage barn near the quarters. The air was thick with the smell of tobacco and earth. Through the thin walls he could hear the low murmur of voices from the slave cabins, and then singing slow, mournful spirituals that rose and fell like waves. Theo lay awake, his body aching, his mind churning with plans of escape. But the overseer's dog patrolled the lanes, and he knew his father meant every word about chains. The days blurred into weeks. Theo's body, unused to labor, rebelled at first. He vomited in the mornings from exhaustion. His fine white skin burned, peeled, and burned again until it darkened to an unfamiliar brown. The blisters on his hands burst and hardened into calluses. He lost weight rapidly. His belly softened and shrank. His jowls disappeared. Yet the work never eased. The tobacco plants grew tall and heavy, requiring constant sucking, removing the flowering tops, and worming, plucking the fat hornworms that devoured the leaves. At first, Theo tried to maintain distance. He cursed the workers under his breath, called them animals when he thought they couldn't hear. He attempted to order them around, reminding them who he was. They ignored him. When he tried to bribe a young boy with promises of future favor, the child only looked frightened and ran to Josiah. Slowly, Theo's commands turned to pleas and then to silence. Josiah never punished him directly. He did not need to. The work itself was punishment enough. But he also did not let Theo fail entirely. When Theo's row began to lag, Josiah would quietly move down the line and show him, without touching, the proper swing of the hoe, a way to leverage body weight instead of arm strength alone. "Let the tool do it," he said once. "Fightin', it just wears you down faster." Theo hated him for it. He told himself Josiah was mocking him, showing off superior knowledge to humiliate the master's son. But as the weeks passed, he began to watch Josiah more closely. The man worked harder than anyone, yet never seemed spent. He knew exactly when a plant needed more hill, or when the soil was too dry. He could predict rain by the feel of the wind. And the others looked to him, not to Grayson, not to Elias for guidance. One evening after a particularly grueling day, Theo sat apart from the crew, nursing raw hands. A young enslaved woman named Ruth, who could not have been more than 18, approached hesitantly and offered him a small pouch of rendered bear fat mixed with herbs. "For the hurt," she said softly, eyes lowered. Theo stared at the pouch, then at her. In the past, he might have made a crude remark or grabbed at her. Now he only took the pouch and muttered, "Thank you." She hurried away, surprised. Later, when the singing began, Theo listened more carefully. The songs were not the cheerful ditties he had imagined slaves might sing. They were deep and aching, full of coded longing for freedom, for a better world beyond this one. One song in particular stayed with him. "I got shoes. You got shoes. All God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes. Gonna walk all over God's heaven." He did not understand all the words, but the melody wrapped around his heart like a vine. Autumn came, and with it the harvest. The tobacco leaves turned golden and had to be cut, strung, and hung in the curing barns. The work was even more back-breaking, requiring precision to avoid bruising the leaves. Theo's body had changed almost beyond recognition. The soft, pampered youth was gone. In his place was a lean, hard-muscled man, with hands like leather and eyes that no longer darted away from labor. One afternoon during harvesting, Grayson pushed the crew too hard in the heat. An older man named Cato collapsed. Grayson raised his whip, but before it could fall, Josiah stepped forward not defiantly, but calmly and said, "He needs water and shade, sir. He'll be no good to you dead." Grayson hesitated. Striking Josiah would mean losing the best foreman on the plantation. He lowered the whip and rode off muttering. Later, when Cato recovered, he pressed Josiah's hand in silent thanks. Theo watched the entire exchange. For the first time, he saw clearly the delicate balance Josiah walked every day, protecting his people without inviting destruction. It was leadership of a kind Theo had never witnessed in his father, who ruled through fear alone. Winter brought brief respite. The fields lay fallow, and the crew turned to repairing tools, splitting firewood, slaughtering hogs for the big house. Theo was still kept apart from the family table, though Elias occasionally sent a servant to check that he lived. The old man watched from the veranda as Theo carried logs alongside the others, his movements now sure and strong. Elias told himself the punishment was working, that his son was becoming a man at last. But something in Theo's eyes unsettled him, a steadiness that had not been there before. Spring returned, and with it the cycle began anew. Plowing, planting, hoeing. Theo no longer needed instruction. He worked as hard as any, sometimes harder, as if trying to outpace the guilt that had begun to gnaw at him. He saw things now he had been blind to before, the way mothers shielded children from Grayson's gaze. The quiet grief when a woman learned her husband had been sold downriver. The small acts of resistance, like slowing work just enough to sabotage a cruel overseer's quota without earning the whip. One night in May, a fierce storm rolled in. Lightning struck one of the curing barns, setting it ablaze. The alarm went up, and everyone, house servants, field hands, even Elias himself, rushed to form a bucket line from the well. Theo worked beside Josiah, passing buckets until his arms trembled. When the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, Josiah grabbed Theo and pulled him back just as a burning beam fell where he had stood. Afterward, soaked and blackened with soot, Theo looked at Josiah in the flickering light. "You saved my life," Josiah shrugged. "Any man would do the same." "No," Theo said quietly. "Not every man." Summer brought drought. The James River ran low, and the tobacco plants began to wilt. Elias grew frantic. A failed crop could ruin him. Debts were mounting from new land purchases. He ordered Grayson to drive the crews harder, to draw water from distant springs if needed. Men and women began to fall ill from the heat and exhaustion. Ruth, the young woman who had given Theo the salve, collapsed one afternoon and did not rise again by evening. Theo found Josiah sitting outside the quarters that night, staring at the dry fields. "We can't keep this pace," Theo said. "People are dying." Josiah nodded slowly. "Your father won't listen to me." "He might listen to me." Josiah looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring something. "You sure you ready for what comes after speaking up?" Theo swallowed. "I have to try." The next day, Theo approached his father in the study. Elias was poring over account books, his face drawn with worry. "Father," Theo began, "the crop is suffering. We need to change how we water the lower fields." Elias barely glanced up. "Grayson knows his business. Grayson knows how to whip, not how to farm." The words came out sharper than Theo intended. He took a breath. "There's a way the old Africans watered crops back home trenches that carry water slow, so it soaks in deep instead of running off. Josiah's father taught him. We could dig them along the contours." Elias set down his quill. "Superstition. Foolishness." "It's not," Theo insisted. "I've seen the soil. The way we're doing it now, most of the water's wasted. If we lose this crop, enough." Elias's voice was steel. "You forget yourself." But Theo did not back down. For the first time in his life, he held his father's gaze. "No, sir. I remember everything. I remember what it feels like to work until you can't stand. I remember watching good people die because someone in this house wanted more profit. If you drive them harder now, you'll have no one left to work next year." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Elias said, "You would take the word of a slave over your own blood?" "I would take wisdom over pride," Theo replied. Elias stared at his son as if seeing a stranger. The boy who had whimpered and begged a year ago was gone. In his place stood a man whose eyes carried a weight Elias recognized, the weight of knowing too much. "Show me," Elias said at last. Over the next weeks, under Josiah's quiet direction and Theo's fierce advocacy, the crew dug the contour trenches. They worked at night to avoid the worst heat, singing softly to keep rhythm. When the first rain came, a hard, soaking downpour that might have washed away a traditional watering, the trenches held. The water seeped slowly into the earth, reaching the roots. The plants revived. The crop was saved. Not bountiful, but enough. Enough to pay the debts. Enough to keep the plantation afloat another year. Elias never thanked Josiah openly. Instead, he ordered that the foreman be given a small plot near the quarters for a vegetable garden, and that his rations include extra meat. Small mercies in a cruel world. To Theo, he said nothing at all for weeks. One evening in September, as the harvest began again, Elias watched from the veranda as Theo walked back from the fields with the crew. His son moved with the same steady gait as the others, laughing at something Josiah said. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in Elias' pride, mingled with unease. That night Theo came to the great house for the first time in over a year. He had bathed in the creek and wore clean clothes, though still plain ones. Elias was alone in the study, a glass of Madeira in hand. "You wanted to see me, father?" Elias gestured to a chair. Theo sat. "You have changed," Elias said finally. "Yes. Because of the work?" Theo considered. "Because of the people doing the work. Because of Josiah." Elias's jaw tightened. "A slave. A man," Theo corrected quietly. "A better man than I was. And most of us are." Elias drank deeply. "And now you think yourself fit to judge?" "I think myself fit to see," Theo said. "I see what this place costs, not just in money, in lives, in souls." Elias set the glass down hard. "This place is all we have. Without it, we are nothing." Theo looked at his father for a long moment. Maybe that's the problem. He rose and left without being dismissed. Elias did not stop him. The year ended as autumn chilled the air once more. Theo's punishment was officially over, but he did not return fully to the big house. He took meals with the crew sometimes, worked beside them still. He began teaching a few of the children their letters in secret, using charcoal on scraps of wood. Josiah watched and said nothing, but approval showed in his eyes. What Josiah had done to Theo was not revenge. It was not even punishment. It was revelation. Through quiet example and unrelenting truth, he had shown the young master that strength could live in dignity rather than domination, that humanity persisted even under the lash. Theo would never be the same. And in changing the sun, Josiah had planted a seed that would one day threaten the entire edifice Elias had raised. The plantation endured, as it always had. The cycles continued planting, tending, harvesting, selling. But something fundamental had shifted. The master's son now carried the weight of knowing, and knowledge, once gained, could not be unlearned. The fields remained green and vast under the Virginia sun, but beneath them ran new currents, slow and deep as the trenches that had saved the crop. And in the evenings, when the spirituals rose from the quarters, Theo sometimes joined his voice to theirs softly, carefully singing of shoes in heaven and walking free one day. Josiah heard him and nodded once, a small gesture that carried more weight than any words. The world did not change overnight. It rarely does. But it had begun to change in one man's heart, and that was enough for now to haunt everything forever.